What I was saying that it's a great session, and I think what you all have started with is something which is very complimentary. I was able to tee into what happened, and I think you just on the right lines in my compliments. Now coming back to the basic question which you have raised as to why did we go to war? What is it that led to it? I would like to simply state, and this wouldn't have been my opinion 50 years back, but today, in hindsight, I feel, and I'm more than convinced, that we were for this war. There was a threat to our national security. And I can do no better than quote Walter Lippmann. He said something like this about security, and I quote, "A nation has security when it does not have to sacrifice its legitimate interests to avoid a war. Is able, if challenged, to maintain them by war." Basically, we are talking about a war which came about because it threatened our national interests. Before we go any further, let me take everybody back into the background. And actually, look back, we find that Bangladesh itself, or East Pakistan itself, as much as West Pakistan, was an unstable construct right from the beginning. Radcliffe Award and its implications are known, but looking at East Pakistan, you have a situation wherein pre-1947, geostrategically, economically, and socially, this part of geography was deeply interlinked with Bengal, Assam. It will be interesting to know that the GDP, the average GDP of this part of, say, Northeast, which included East Pakistan as well, was higher than the national average. So at one level, when this partition took place, we stepped into a deep interlinked economic and social link. You had East Pakistan, which comprised Bengalis. Their language was Bangla, and they were ethnically and otherwise akin to their counterparts of West Bengal. What happened then, that West Pakistan, which dominated the scene, started creating situations which they didn't comprehend the outcome of. You may recall there was a language agitation in the 50s itself, when Urdu was being imposed on East Pakistan, whereas their mother tongue was Bangla. Now, you may recall we've had similar situations, but I think we handle them much better. Thereafter, what happens? When you look back, you found that Pakistan, more than 90%, in fact 93% if I remember correctly, was the civil services of Pakistan comprised from West Pakistan. Similarly, in the armed forces, so there was discrimination outright. Language and a culture was being forced. There's some kind of a belief that Islam has a greater bonding than the culture. This was certainly a major miscalculation, and resentment was growing. But what happened thereafter? If you recall, till 1965, the border between India and East Pakistan was relatively quite open. We had the train services going, the trade was on. In fact, the entire region prospered because of that. But 62 war, and thereafter 65, it emboldened Pakistan, and things had hardened. The border was sealed, there were no train services, and both East Pakistan, more than West Bengal, East Pakistan was certainly being starved. That, now what happens? We have an election in Pakistan wherein Awami League led by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, as you all know. I'm trying to recap all this because this is something which we must keep in mind to understand why we went to war. You all know that it was a thumping majority which Awami League got. Pakistan, the rulers of Pakistan decided to ignore. And when I think it was in March 71, or it was in December 70, the Awami League said, look, enough is enough, and they came up with a 6-point program, which was talking about federalism, which talked about issues which Mujib had raised, and the rulers of Pakistan. This is the first point which I wish to make, the background, which led to what happened thereafter. We all know that Pakistan backed out of it. There was the Bhutto, who was a runner-up in this election, said no, there's no question about it. And they decided to use a military solution, a hammer, to say, all right, even if we have to knock off 3-4 lakhs of these dark-skinned Bengalis, we'll do it. And we'll sort out this problem. Now, here is a case of a major miscalculation. You can't find a military solution to every problem. A military solution does not mean just using a bullet. Now, this was the genesis of the which forced. Now, what was happening at that time globally? I would like to point it out. You see, after World War II, there was this orchestration. The military was not the only solution to the problem. There were other facets of statecraft which had to come in, and especially the nuclear deterrence. It was important. There was a certain amount of restraint which was imposed. And the war was not an isolated settle between the two neighbors. It had global ramifications. Like what was happening then? Cold War was at its peak. On one hand, Pakistan, you may recall, was hobnobbing with America, and they played a big role in Henry Kissinger going to China, I think in April 70 or April 71, and then Nixon went there in 72. So America's opening into China, Pakistan facilitated, and it was their frontline state. We had lost the 62 war. In 65, we fought the war, but China was hostile to us, if you recall. But now things were changing. We had Indo-Soviet Friendship Treaty, and the two superpowers were very clear as to how they will look at this entire thing. While America, in particular, was trying to caution India, at the same time, we had the backing of Soviet Union. So the situation sometime in March 71 was that of India being pushed into a situation where about 10 lakh refugees had come in. There were massive murders and genocide which was happening in our neighborhood. And we could not be a bystander because it was a direct threat to our security. It's just a Siliguri corridor between East Pakistan and Tibet. Not only that, China had also gradually started fueling insurgency in the northeast. So it was something which had to be seen in totality. When this happened, I think Indian state had its cards and played them very well. Our Prime Minister took it upon himself to create a world opinion. Also, we signed a treaty. America threatened us by trying to send the Seventh Fleet. Now, all this was happening, and I remember as a young officer, I was part of the para brigade, the 2 para, and we were deployed in West Bengal. In fact, around Calcutta to be exact. So, although we were a battalion part of the parachute brigade, but we were located very close to Fort William. We happening, and we being airborne component had to be a picture of the overall scene. We know how Mukti Bahini came into being, how we were able to provide them muscle power. And between March 71 to December 71, a lot had to be done. It was just not a question of resistance between them. You know, as far as our forces were concerned, our entire deployment focus was in the north and west. We had, if I remember correctly, 10 mountain divisions and 13 infantry divisions, most of them deployed on these two borders. We had 2 divisions, if I remember correctly, 9 there and 4 there, in 70 to West Bengal to deal with the Naxalite problem. But overall, there wasn't much available. On the other hand, Pakistan had initially to begin with a division plus, but they built it up to around four divisions. So we had a situation where we had to build up. Our mountain divisions had to be regrouped, if at all, and how much can we pull out? Are we looking at China doing the same kind of a confrontationist attitude which they showed in 65? I think a very cool calculation and analysis reveals that this China is not going to do what they tried to do in 65. The reasons are very simple. There was a serious confrontation of China with Soviet Union over the Yuzhny River. Something like 40 divisions had been deployed by Soviet Union in that area. They had their hands full. Not only that, China was trying to get into the international forum. Their admission into the UN, recognition by the US, and a whole lot of things were there. So it was a very well-judged assessment on the part of India to say that the Chinese interference to this will be minimal. At the same time, we couldn't depend on this alone. So we had to wait till the pass is closed, and that also gave us time to prepare ourselves. A lot of preparation had to be done. Not only that, the terrain of Bangladesh was riverine, there were marshes. Therefore, any operation done pre-monsoon or during monsoon would have its own compulsion. If we see all this, we find India did the following. One, knowing that the war between the two nations is no longer a pass-paros ki baatcheet, it is a global ramification, we went about telling the world as to what was happening. We also realized that America was fully backing Pakistan and indulged in this treaty. And at the same time, we did a calculated risk by knowing that China is not going to come. But at the same time, we did not want the war to go on, to start before winter for our own reasons. I think that is something which can be discussed and debated later. But my final point in this is this, that anybody who thinks that we went into war and we gung-ho and we say, all right, no, that is one. Secondly, fighting a war is not something which a soldier wants. It has a tremendous backlash, not only in terms of casualties that we suffer. Economically, a country goes back by 10 years or 20 years, depending on which war are we talking about. So this is something which was not of our choosing. But when it was forced on us, we did not take. And I think we came out with flying colors. I will leave it at that at the moment, because I find on the panel General Sahni, an old friend, who has his hands-on experience plus a tremendous vision about the whole thing. To take it on from there, and thereafter during the question hours, if there are some more questions, I'll be just too happy to answer. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Stay with us. And General Sahni, ultimately, I believe you must be preparing for the NDA when the 71 war was happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, ultimately, I want to understand from you, it was someone else's affair. It was neighboring of a country's affair. Why did we get into it?
Okay. Before I take, this is the first that I'm going to speak at this forum, so I must thank, value of words, must thank Dr. Sandeep, General Pannu, the Director USI, and delighted to be sharing the podium with you and my respected, who's been my senior, my co-commander, was my company commander when we were youngsters in the NDA. So it's delighted to be out here. I think the question that he asked, I'm going to address that just in a second. But what I would state is that, like to put on basis is that the causative factors of the conflict had its roots in events pre and post-partition. I think the historical wrongs, the geographical divisions, when we look at the Northeast and Bengal, when we see the direction that Pakistan took in that 2.5 decades of becoming an Islamic republic, the contested borders of India, these were all things which contributed to the thinking and influenced the people who were sitting at the helm of affairs when the events unfolded the way they unfolded in East Pakistan then. We have to realize that though the apparent reasons which were known to everyone was that we had this deluge of refugees, became 10 million in a period of few months. We had economic constraints that were coming up on India. There was murder of democratic rights that happened in this neighboring state of ours, which had been carved out from us just 2.5 decades back, and the genocide that the armed forces went in. But I think more importantly that we have to see is the emotive issue that was there in the background which influenced events. And I thought the question which he asked me, I would like to just share an experience. He's absolutely right. I was appearing for my NDA exam in December in Calcutta because my father was AQ 9 Div, which went in on the Jessore-Khulna axis. And I want to recount an incident which brought this out very effectively for me. Maybe I didn't understand it then, but now in hindsight I did. After the war got over, as you're aware, some PW camps came up in Ranchi itself. So when 9 Division de-inducted from there and came back to Ranchi, I was with my father in one of the visits that he was going to the PW camp. He was the AQ of the division at that stage. And while going through the camp, suddenly one of these Pakistani senior JCOs came and caught my dad's feet and said, I was taken aback. My father was himself surprised and he said, Chote Saab, aap yahan par, aapne mujhe pehchana nahi. Just want to talk about the linkage. This boy was a young man when partition took place, just about the same age as my dad. His family had worked for generations in the family of ours. My father was from Rawalpindi, and they had been those old Rai Bahadurs and all that story was there. But this family had been there. And my father looked very much, I would say, was an exact replica of my grandfather who died just before partition. So he recognized him. And I think this emotive bond suddenly changed the story in the manner this whole thing was perceived by people like us who were a younger generation and by the people who were sitting there. My father spent a lot of time when Brigadier Hayat, who was the Jessore-Khulna commander, went back after the repatriation took place, requested him कि please request your wife to buy a sari from India. Usko Kanjivarams बहुत पसंद है, एक Kanjivaram sari ले लेना. I'm just trying to say, so please remember, it was 2.5 decades after the partition. There was an emotive relationship that existed. The leadership of the country at that time was people who had seen this formation, and a lot of them were upset with the way things were done and unfolded, and we had this partition of India in the manner that it happened. So I think this is one aspect that influenced. And also we have to understand the political leadership. I mean, there is no doubt about it. Somewhere it came out in one of the last 2 sessions. The political leadership makes a tremendous difference. You go to war because of political reasons which affect the state and not because of military reasons. You execute the battle in a manner that military dictates, but otherwise the political issues are going to be the one which will lead it. And when I'm saying this, may I just, before I talk about this political leader, and I think I want to talk about Indira Gandhi for 2 reasons. And before that, before I forget, 1971 war book has just been taken out by General Ian Cardozo. I think today was an apt day for us to have seen it. I got to know of it rather late, but sir, we'd be delighted somewhere down the line when you're there to share some of it. And I promise to read it immediately after this. Pick it up and read that book. I'm sure it'll be an absolutely superlative inputs into what was said and what Colonel Sajjad said. I think there is a brilliant mix that we would love to see out on this bit about your book, sir. So I was saying it's very important to look at Indira Gandhi. She was a very sharp, intelligent, high IQ, a Scorpio to the core. My wife is a Scorpio, so I can tell you how Scorpios, they don't forget. Yeah? Huh? The Scorpios they have a memory of an elephant. Yeah? So she never forgot. And please remember, her relationship with Nixon and Kissinger was wrapped in certain things, but she was very, very pragmatic. She would take a decision which was never influenced by emotions, but she would never forget somebody who had been rude to her. Let me just put it in that manner. And the reason I'm saying is I was also privileged to see her. I was ADC to the Chief of Army Staff, and I think the kind of respect that she gave to General Malhotra, who was the chief, she never gave to any other I would say minister that came into her office. She would receive him at the front of the office and see him off at the back, come to the door to see him off. And the amount of respect she had. So what I'm trying to say, very perceptive, very dispassionate, decisive, and she was not a pushover. And she had been groomed by history and diverse events that happened from the time she was a kid in 1917 when she was born, growing up with people like Nehru, Mountbatten, Sardar Patel. I mean, the dynamics that came up of Bharatiya Mahasabha and the evoking, the feelings that it evoked and the feelings that it generated. We had the legacy of Shri Ashutosh Mukherjee, who set up the Presidency College. I mean, these were all very, very disparate kind of things which created and groomed this lady who had some great ideas. And please don't forget, we all remember as youngsters, her passion for rishis and all. She was a very devout Hindu. That was one of her greatest strengths. She believed in the civilizational strength of India. So this lady very strongly believed in the unity and integrity of India. And she had felt all her life as she groomed up that this concept of two nations based on religion, the concept of statehood which came up, which was on based of linguistic barrels, is not the way to go ahead for a new nation state which is emerging. And this is where she harmonized with Sardar Patel, though she was Nehru's daughter, but she harmonized on this aspect. So what we have to understand is we had this lady who was very clear about the unity and integrity, believed in the sovereignty, believed in democracy, and believed that these artificial lines which had been created on religion and linguistic will be detrimental for the overall security and integration and growth of India. And this guided her movement. So she was already preconceived that she had got an opportunity and she was looking at it to be able to encash it. And the orchestration and choreographic of events that happened thereafter, whether it's the Mukti Bahini, whether it's the diplomatic initiative, whether the Indo-Soviet treaty. I mean, when you read each of them, I had the privilege to serve with Ranan Sen, who was part of DP Dhar, the coterie of DP Dhar, PN Haksar, TN Kaul, and RN Kao. I mean, that was a phenomenal combination. They had tremendous synergy of thought and energy, and they were all nationalists. And that's how this whole story panned out from there. And I must say out here that keeping this in mind, when the opportunity came, this was the single paramount most factor which led to the final action that had happened. How the military operation panned out, whether it was to initially just give a foothold and subsequently to move in and take Dhaka, are events that unfolded which talks about the dynamism of the military leadership and the political leadership to be able to do that. So I would say this was the single most paramount reason which led to the events that unfolded as it would. The geopolitical reasons I'll just give. She was very clear, and please, when we talk about China today in context of Ladakh, we talk about an asymmetry. I'm sorry, China was that time just about at the same level as India. The Kissinger-Nixon engagement to try and build this powerhouse had still not started. I mean, that was the initial stages which it had happened. So she was very clear that China will always be a threat to India's sovereignty. And why I'm saying this is her understanding and utterances of Mao's the palm and the five fingers, and is all these stories that came out, Chow and Lai, all these had a meaning. So all this thing influenced her mind that this is a good opportunity. You cannot have another wound festering in your body, which was creating enough problems within the country. So I think that was the third thing, clarity of vision, geopolitical considerations. And I think USA, as she said, it had already fallen in behind the fronts of supporting Pakistan. So that is what weighed, and I'm told the kind of deliberation that happened before the Indo-Soviet treaty, you have to see, this was an alliance which was done with so much maturity for a country which was asymmetrically weaker. We gave no bases, we gave them no flying rights, we did not allow them to get anything which would have shown and affected the integrity and sovereignty of India. So that was the greatest winning of this Indo-Soviet treaty. We got a lot, but we didn't give that much, which would have shown that we are a vassal state to the Soviet Union. Our strategic autonomy in those concepts was maintained and retained. And I would just put it at the end, she is the first lady and the only war that happened on humanitarian causes other than US. She evoked the right of people to be able to, and the voice of people to be able to go into war. And I think the final execution was that it was an all-of-nation effort. Today, when I look at it, the jointness of the three services, the jointness of the political hierarchy, the great stories which Sam Manekshaw, I mean, the erstwhile Field Marshal, I was the privilege of being his LO once, and I wrote the first biographic thing when I was doing High Command. I was made to volunteer to write the start of the book, which I never completed. But the issue is that that gentleman was when he talked about how he got the railways, the agricultural, the foreign minister, and everybody to work in synergy, actually spoke about an all-of-nation approach, which emanated from the leadership that happened. So political leadership and strength was phenomenal. I'll stop here for a minute for only one reason, that I'll hand it over, otherwise I'll keep talking. And as I told him, he's got a problem. Having two generals on the panel all suffer from verbal diarrhea. If you don't put a stop to it, you'll not be able to get ahead.
No,
so please, over to you.
I'm a primetime anchor for almost a decade. And only a gripping topic and a fantastic set of speakers could get an anchor listen without interrupting. We are so used to interrupting the speakers for like every minute, but luckily not in prime time mode currently, and I'm in listening mode. General Sharma, the global statement, the global overtones were one of the reasons. How strong was it that Indira wanted to make a statement to the entire world? I'll come to the takeaway part slightly later, or maybe we'll touch upon it in the similar session post lunch. But how strong was that we wanted to make a global statement?
Well, I think that's a very pertinent question. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, that's a very pertinent question. I'll slightly differently. There was a threat to our national security, and we had to do what our national interests demanded. The process, we also had to assert ourselves in a nation which has autonomy at all levels, clearly at the city. We 1962 was just 8-9 years back. 1964-65 war had taken place. And there was a very clear impression in the minds of people in the world on two counts. One was this, that India was militarily not as strong as it should be and could be a pushover. And secondly, there was a major miscalculation on the part of Nixon, the Americans, and the Pakistanis, that India will be just standing by and let this happen. Like I mentioned earlier, after World War II, it was not a question of just two nations fighting with each other. At the end of it, it was a military situation and the war gets over. No, there are many other angles involved, and I think after fighting this war, India cleared many misconceptions, both at the regional level, also at the international level, at the global level. I hope I have answered your question.
What I wanted to understand with you, sir, was it actively, politically, one of the reasons that you feel could have led the then Prime Minister, to pursue harder as far as the 71 war decision is concerned? Within the government, I mean, within the bureaucracy, within the military.
See, I had no personal experience of knowing what was happening in the South Bloc at that time. I was a young captain. But with hindsight and with the experience of dealing with these things subsequently and reading about it, I think the bigger question was, as India arrived, India at that time, if you remember, economically we were weak. We were not even self-sufficient in food. So we were being considered a pushover. And by this, number one, like I mentioned, we told the world that, look, take it easy. That is one. Secondly, your specific question, obviously, when a situation like this happens, it is not only it is in our national interest to be pragmatic and to see if we can correct some of the distortions which had taken place. An unstable construct. It is my belief that Bangladesh had to happen. How can you have a country separated by more than 1,000 miles, almost 1,800 kilometers apart, and this particular agreement having the entire Indian uh, states around it, there's no way that they could have survived more because of the policies that they followed. I think certainly we had our national interest, which went beyond just securing our threats. Okay, it was very much legitimate. We had to do it.
Taking cue from what General Sharma mentioned, a country which was, separated by roughly 1,000-kilometer distance. I want to have a slight connection to the today's scenario. The two-front war situation. Then we had one side like West and slightly North, more military intense, and Bangladesh, then East Pakistan was more of a civil domain kind of situation, like the civil war situation. Was the two-front war kind of situation something similar to what we see today, or you see that was one of the factors going ahead with 1971 war to ensure that this doesn't continue, the threat perception of two-front war doesn't continue?
I think at that stage, if you really look at it, you really had a three-front war going on, because you had West Pakistan, you had East Pakistan, you had China. I think you had three different neighbors, though that time the relationship with China hadn't fallen. But I think when I talk about why I so firmly believe what Indira Gandhi did a lot of things wrong later on. I mean, what happened subsequently in the emergency, what happened in Punjab, were theirs. But I think some of the core values based at the time when this war happened, I think it was at national security and the sovereignty of India. And she firmly believed that language and religion cannot be the basis for making nation states. And that is why I think she was hell-bent on disrupting this, because India was also in an evolutionary stage. I mean, these kind of things, if they had got a fillip, we've had enough problems of language. You look at what happened in the South. I mean, we've seen it within our own country. We've had communal riots which carried on for years and years. So somewhere down the line, economic development overtook these minor religious sentimentality, but which might again resurface. Language. I remember there's a Sri Lankan academician who said one thing: you have two languages and you'll have one nation, and you have one language and you'll have two nations. And I think East Pakistan and West Pakistan is an exact replica of that. Insistence on only having one national language, derogating the very, very famous, I would say, very rich heritage of the Bengali culture and its civilizational and its cultural strength, I think led to this war. So if I draw a parallel today, I would say two things which are very, very clear. The way we have dealt with China has been again because of politically strong, resolute political leadership. The direction given by there has been extremely good. So if I had to draw a parallel from then, I think today's border situation on the India-China border, though we still have a two-front war, we have reached, the timings have changed. There is an asymmetry with China, which is not in our favor. There is a symmetry with Pakistan, which is in our favor. And I think the way the events have unfolded today, I think the resolute leadership at top is a very, very prime important factor to ensure that the country moves correctly in the direction of national security. I think all these issues of Atmanirbhar Bharat, it's not going to happen tomorrow. But what it is, it's setting the pace for an independent India which grows up and becomes very, very critical. With the evolving geo-economic center moving to the Asia-Pacific from the old Euro-Atlantic, India, I mean, geographically, nobody can wish us away. In the Indian Ocean, we have a predominant space. Yeah? We do matter. So I think somewhere down the line, resolute leadership then and now is the correct time for us to grow. It was a turning point for us because it was carving out and stabilizing of a nation state. Here India is at a threshold of moving into a different realm, both economically and stature-wise. So I think the timings are right. The threat is on two fronts. Earlier on, the threat was in a growing symmetrical dimension where the superpowers played games. Today, India is in a position where there is an asymmetry in both sides, but it is no longer the 62. As I said, the benchmark is the 67 to really look at how the Indian armed forces has grown and how the Indian nation has grown today to be nearly 3 trillion economy. So I think we are moving in the right lines. The parallels can be taken there. The other issue that we have to really look at is that we have to be a little more pragmatic when we look at world opinion and looking at how we shape the environment, which she did brilliantly. And I think it's happening today. We are taking up leadership in climate roles. We are taking up in the resilience of the supply chain in the Indo-Pacific. So I'm saying that the kind of choreography of the interaction with the international community is beautiful. Today, India is like is a bride who's in demand, and we can kick anybody whom we want to and take what we want ourselves. So pragmatism lies there. So I'm just saying, so today the US wants to sort of want you in their quarters, but we've been able to do it right. And I think what has happened in Afghanistan has only taught us our strategic autonomy needs to be maintained in all this thing. We will have alliances because people need alliances more than we need them. They need us now. And when you look at the other space, when you're going in towards Russia, Iran, people suddenly, if we can develop this kind of a trilateral, multilateral relationship, I think India will be in the right position. Maybe we're moving in that direction. I mean, the utterances that I see. Sir, we've got...
Indian nationals, they killed them in the border. So Pakistanis, while making hot pursuit on Mukti Bahini, were killing Indian soldiers. Number 3 was public opinion. Mrs. Gandhi had to consider, being a pragmatic leader, the Muslim opinion. So in the month of August, there was a massive rally in Panipat, chaired by Lieutenant Colonel Shahnawaz Khan,
Yes.
was commander of Netaji Subhash Bose Army, the battalion commander. And he was joined by Maulana Maududi, Ahle Jamaat, the Madrasa group. So there were lakhs of Muslims there. She got the message that the Muslims will be also in her favor. Number 4 was, I'm telling you the secret about it. Niazi was planning for attack on India actually. In the month of September, he requisitioned for more aircraft, more guns,
Which couldn't come in.
and a lot of tanks. The aim was to take the war to Indian soil, first by capturing Agartala, including Agartala airport, that is within stone's throw of
Boundaries with the Bangladesh boundary,
Pakistan, yeah.
airport boundary.
Number 2, they would put another armored column through Khulna access to take and threaten Kolkata, if possible, take it. That was also worrying her. And under this, and then with that simultaneously, that would probably happen in 72. In the month of March or April, the Chinese corridor will open up. These are the things that probably forced her to take a decision by December.
Okay.
So I'll go. Sorry, I'll go by.
Point taken, sir. I'm reaching the last stage, sir. I'll throw the floor open for Q&A little later. General Sharma, just exactly what General Sahni mentioned. The last question to you is basically, if you draw the comparison, specifically in the factors domain that drew India in 71 and the current factors which have basically been changing India's position, our adversaries' relative position have changed drastically as compared to 71. How do you see the current factors in terms of priority, in terms of the global importance? Are we closer to that? Have these changed the factors which could draw India into conflict today as compared to the factors that drew, as you mentioned, which were predominantly by the national security and the sovereignty aspect? How do you see these two comparisons?
Like I mentioned, the strategic development after Second World War is something which has made conflicts, whether they are local or regional, with a global. Now today, when we see India and threats to its security, we are not only talking about military threat, we are talking about political, economic, social, and all dimensions all of security. That is one aspect. The second thing is there is so much of global interdependence, while you may be in conflict on economic front with the country, but socially there may be certain compulsions which keep you together. Likewise, militarily, now let's take the example of our defense preparedness. I think the question of Nirbhay Bharat has come about, I think, about 30, 40 years late. In our inventory, we have equipment of Soviet or Russian origin, we have American equipment, we have European equipment. It's a nightmare. I think Arun Sahni will agree with me. It is quite a situation. Therefore, it is not something where battle lines are drawn and you is drawn and you go and fight. In fact, we are actually the entire world. We are in a state of war. War does not necessarily that we go to fire bullets at each other. There is an economic war. There is a social war. There is a social and ethnic conflict, and all these are intended. But overall, I think the basic question of national interest is redefine dimensions need to be. Yeah, that's it.
I see we are reaching close. In fact, we are spilling the session scheduled time. I invite Journalist Sahni for closing remarks, and then we'll have a few minutes left for the Q&A in case anyone wants to ask questions. Sahni.
I'll just address 2 or 3 points that came up. I think one thing which I wanted to talk about that it was great that you highlighted those issues, sir. But I would just put it that those I covered under the fact that these were the apparent reasons. The refugees, economic reasons were all apparent. But there was more to it which led to what happened of taking the decision when you were not in 2.5 decades back, not strong enough to be able to take these kind of major decisions, fighting, and how you played the superpowers to be able to do those. That was the play which really led to what evolved in finally in the execution. But I would just like to talk about her pragmatism, and this is where I talk about it. She was she had grown up seeing this whole evolution of the 62, 65, and reached where she was when she reached in 71. And I have to tell you, today when you look at it, Xinjiang, she never ever talked about Aksai Chin at that stage. Why didn't she talk about? Because Aksai Chin, theoretically, when you go down and look at the geography, that was the first session here. The western extremity of the Xinjiang plateau is the Aksai Chin. So, I mean, your legitimate right, no right, she never dwelt on areas which were nebulous. That's about a pragmatism. The issue that came up, one more just point I'll say, is which came up last time, that what was it, that why did she succumb to whatever she did? I mean, I was told about this from somebody who worked in the PMO then. I mean, this could be one of the events that happened. If you remember, Muzaffar Hussain, he was the chief secretary in East Pakistan. He was in India's custody. His wife, who was stuck up in the Middle East, had a relationship with Bhutto of sorts. That's what the story goes. And when Bhutto was flying in after the war, when it was decided that he's going to be coming back to Pakistan, he had to have a refuel in Dubai. It was orchestrated by the Indian, for this lady to meet because she wanted her husband's release to happen. And I think at that stage, as you're aware, the directions had already been given by the military court for the execution of Mujibur Rahman, and they felt the strongest reason was, because he was in Pakistan, was that he may be assassinated before the transition happens in the government and before Bhutto really gets into place. So he promised that he would release the Bangbandu, as they said, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, and that to an extent, and took I would say, an open promise that she will accede to his request somewhere down the line. So somewhere down the line, this little bit of thing also may have played in her mind when the final issue of handing over without, as a military man, it doesn't justify to my reasoning, but I mean, this is what I hear, were the intricacies that happened at the political power. Military people is an instrument, and an instrument is only as effective as its direction from the top. So there, somewhere down the line, the instrument was blunted. after it did its job, then it moved into the politico-diplomatic reign. And I do feel in a lot of areas our diplomacy has failed for the position that we are here in today with our neighboring states. I think that's a story of another kind. But thank you very much. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, General Sharma and General Sahni. And the instrument that you mentioned certainly changed the geography and
Absolutely.
India's future. On that note, I throw the floor open for Q&A. Anyone has a specific question now?
I wonder if anyone has covered that the genesis, as General Sahni said, goes back a little earlier of language.
True.
And this whole problem.
50s.
The first time we nearly went to war was at the time of the Liaquat Ali Nehru
Accord.
Pact.
True, sir.
We nearly went to war. Eastern Command at that time in Ranchi was commanded by General Atul Singh. They actually held a war game. And way back then in 1950, it was decided, because we didn't have the bridging equipment, that the best route would be the northern route via Meghalaya into Dhaka.
True, sir.
Geography doesn't change.
Yes, true, sir.
Second is, I'm not a guest here, sir. I've just intruded to come to meet my friend, Colonel Sajjad. I have to introduce you because not very many of you would know. He walked over, he was in the Para Brigade, an artillery officer in 1971 in the Sialkot sector. He walked over to India with their op plans, the offensive op plans.
So you must introduce yourself, because I had the privilege to be with him. I mean, he does a lot on military history. So please, you must.
Well, the Brigade Bhari knows, and Brigade Sir, my name I'm popularly known in the army and my regiment is Ponchi.
Yeah.
And it's obviously I've had it since ND.
No, I said because I know you, but the others may not. He himself is an historian par excellence on events like these.
So, and thereafter, he was with our.
You have to introduce yourself, so that's what.
I said Ponchi, that's my name from NDA.
Yeah.
Chandrakant,
Chandrakant.
ex-4 guards.
He wrote, I mean, I had the privilege to do a book, sit on the forum with him in Jaipur. In Jaipur Lit Fest, I had a chance to sit with him for his book.
Sajjad's story.
Absolutely, sir.
Thereafter, he was in the Tripura sector during the Mukti Bani operations.
Absolutely.
So he has a first-hand account of both the things.
Yeah,
His
cool.
escape story, I wish he would write about it. He refuses to write about it in it. But his contribution to India and Bangladesh friendship exceeds his role in Bangladesh. He was instrumental in getting Sheikh Hasina to India to honor our war widows.
True. Yeah, that's true, sir.
Sajjad himself who did it.
Absolutely.
Because at that time, and even prior to it, there was a section of fundamentalists in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, who were anti-India, I would say. Sheikh Hasina turned it around, and he worked with her closely, and it is he on the, I think the 7th of April 17, that she came over and honored our war widows.
True.
And thereafter, every year, they've been honoring several of our war widows. He's the man. So, Rabbi, will you get up and show your face?
Everybody knows him now. He's been on the panel. We know him.
Right. That's all that I really wanted to really introduce the man behind the
No, thank you.
face and name.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It's an honor to have you among us. Pleasure. Thank you. Any more questions? Thank you. On that note, I thank everyone to bear with us, and fantastic session. As I mentioned,
Good to see you.
non-prime time mode could not interrupt much, but it's our pleasure. Thank you so much, General Sharma.
Thank you, sir.
You didn't hear me properly.
Thanks, sir. Thanks, Ashish.